Introduction. Cal Newport opens with Carl Jung walking away from the crowded intellectual life of Zurich to build Bollingen Tower, a stone retreat near Lake Zurich. Jung was not escaping work. He was creating the conditions for the kind of thought that could separate him from Freud and let him reshape modern psychology. That image gives the book its central contrast. Deep work is professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive abilities to their limit. Creates new value, improves skill, and is hard to replicate. Shallow work is logistical, low value, often performed while distracted, and easy for someone else to copy. Newport then shows that depth is not nostalgia. Woody Allen wrote dozens of films on a manual typewriter. Bill Gates used Think weeks to isolate himself with papers and ideas. Neil Stephenson protected long, uninterrupted stretches because interruption would trade novels for scattered messages. The modern office, however, moves the other way. Inboxes, network tools, open offices, and instant communication make shallow behavior feel normal. The practical opportunity appears in Jason Ben, a consultant who realized an Excel script could automate much of his job. He rebuilt himself as a programmer by forcing long, difficult concentration, then kept that habit by arriving early and working before distractions arrived. Newport uses Ben to make the argument contemporary. Depth is not only for psychologists in stone towers, novelists with typewriters, or executives on remote retreats. It is a learnable professional skill for people whose value depends on mastering hard material and producing something the market can recognize as excellent. The introduction therefore states the deep work hypothesis. The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time that it is becoming increasingly valuable. The people who cultivate it and make it central to their working lives will thrive. The book is a defense of that hypothesis and a training manual for building a personal Bollingen Tower inside a distracted world. This promise is not that every reader should disappear from society. The promise is that attention can be reclaimed deliberately, and that a career organized around depth can produce both better work and a better working life. Part 1. The Idea. Chapter 1. Deep work is valuable. The digital economy does not reward everyone equally. It divides people by the kind of value they can create. Newport begins with 3 winners. Nate Silver, whose election forecasts turned statistical skill into a media empire. David Heinemeier Hansson, whose Ruby on Rails work made him a global programming star. And John Doerr, whose venture capital put money behind the machines and companies reshaping the economy. From this trio, Newport extracts 3 advantaged groups. People who work creatively with intelligent machines, people who are the very best in a universal market, and people with capital. The capital path is not easy to copy, but the first 2 paths are open enough to matter. The chapter therefore narrows a huge economic story into a practical question for the ordinary ambitious worker. If intelligent machines keep getting better, and if digital networks let employers reach the best people anywhere, then average competence becomes less secure. The defensible position is to become excellent at learning and excellent at shipping. To reach them, Newport says, 2 abilities are decisive. You must quickly master hard things, and you must produce at an elite level in both quality and speed. Nate Silver's tools were not simple consumer apps. He used databases, statistical software, and intricate models. Hansson did not merely know programming. He produced Ruby on Rails, a concrete work the market valued. The bridge between these abilities and deep work comes through deliberate practice. Learning hard cognitive skills requires tight attention and feedback. Newport connects this to Milan research. Skill improves when the relevant mental circuit fires again and again in isolation. Distraction fires too many circuits at once. This is why the chapter treats focus as a technical requirement rather than a lifestyle preference. A person trying to master databases, statistics, medicine, programming, or any other demanding craft cannot casually mix practice with feeds and messages and expect the same result. The second half of the chapter turns to production. Adam Grant rose quickly at Wharton by batching demanding work into long, isolated stretches. His productivity illustrates Newport's formula. High-quality work equals time spent multiplied by intensity of focus. Sophie Leroy's research on attention residue explains why the formula matters. When you switch tasks, part of your mind remains stuck on the previous task, especially if it was unfinished. A quick inbox glance can therefore harm the next stretch of thinking more than it seems. Newport ends by addressing Jack Dorsey, whose executive work thrives on interruption. Dorsey's case is real but specific. Some senior executives function as decision engines. Most knowledge workers should not imitate that distraction unless their role truly demands it. The chapter's warning is severe because the advantage compounds. If one worker can learn harder material faster and then turn that skill into better output with less residue, the gap between that worker and a distracted peer widens with every project. Chapter 2. Deep work is rare. Open offices and constant connectivity are the first signs of a workplace culture that can undermine a skill the previous chapter made valuable. Newport starts with the open office. Facebook planned a vast shared floor under Frank Gehry's design, while Jack Dorsey praised Square's open space for serendipity. News organizations pushed writers toward Twitter, and constant connectivity became a mark of being current. The puzzle is that these trends reduce depth even though depth produces the most valuable results. Newport's answer is not that leaders secretly hate focus. It is that knowledge work is hard to measure. When a company cannot easily see the cost of distraction, it tends to reward the behaviors that are easiest to see. An employee who answers quickly, attends every meeting, and seems constantly available looks productive, even when that availability prevents the work that would matter most. The first explanation is the metric black hole. Tom Cochran at Atlantic Media tried to quantify the cost of email. He discovered how hard it is to price a habit that feels small in each instance but spreads across an entire organization. Leslie Perlow's work with consultants showed a similar problem. A team feared that disconnecting for a full day would hurt client service, but clients did not revolt and the team improved. This does not prove that every office can unplug casually. It proves that many beliefs about necessary responsiveness are never actually tested. Newport calls this the principle of least resistance. When impact is hard to measure, workplaces drift toward what is easiest in the moment, even if it weakens work that matters. Yet, if the cost of constant connectivity is opaque, the habit survives. Newport then names a second force, busyness as proxy for productivity. In factories, output can be counted. In knowledge work, ambiguity tempts workers to display visible activity. Email at all hours, fast responses, meetings, open office chatter, instant messages. Marissa Meyer's Yahoo remote work decision becomes an example of judging productivity through visible login activity. Richard Feynman stands as the counterexample. He protected the time needed to do real physics because he knew what mattered. The contrast is not simply colorful. Feynman had a clear hierarchy of value, so administrative work could be judged against the thing that made him useful. Many knowledge workers lack that hierarchy, so shallow behavior expands into the empty space left by ambiguity. The final explanation is the cult of the Internet. Anything linked to social platforms or digital visibility is treated as innovative by default. Alyssa Rubin's reporting, a refrigerated truck asking to be liked on Facebook, and the pressure on writers to tweet all show the same assumption. Because the harm is hard to measure and the culture worships connectivity, shallow practices spread. That is exactly why depth becomes a personal advantage. What is rare and valuable grows more valuable when others abandon it. The rareness is therefore not a natural law. It is a cultural accident, supported by bad measurement, visible busyness, and technological optimism. Once you see the foundation, Newport says you can step away from it without guilt. Chapter 3. Deep work is meaningful. Part 1 ends by shifting from economics to the inner quality of a focused life. Newport begins with Rick Furr, a blacksmith who works by hand at Door County Forge Works. Furr's craft requires attention so complete that a small lapse can ruin hours of labor. This kind of meaning is easy to see in manual craft, but Newport wants to show that knowledge work can draw from the same source. Depth is not only a way to earn more, it can make work feel worth doing. That matters because many arguments for productivity sound cold. More output, more status, more economic security. Newport wants the reader to feel that depth also answers a more human hunger, the desire for work that has texture, standards, and dignity. The first argument is neurological. Winifred Gallagher, after a frightening cancer diagnosis, concluded that the quality of life depends heavily on what attention selects. A person who gives rapt attention to important work constructs a mental world filled with gravity and significance. A person whose attention stays inside an inbox constructs a world of stress, triviality, and irritation. Deep work changes the world the mind inhabits because attention is the material from which that world is built. The claim is not that problems vanish when you focus. It is that a day spent attending to consequential things creates a different interior life from a day spent reacting to fragments. The second argument is psychological. Flow research showed that people often feel best when stretched near the limits of their abilities toward a clear goal. Flow does not require glamorous subject matter. It requires challenge, skill, concentration, and feedback. Deep work supplies those conditions more reliably than scattered busyness. This gives the chapter a practical psychological edge. You do not wait for meaningful work to arrive fully formed. You increase the conditions under which ordinary work can become absorbing. The final argument is philosophical. Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly argued that craft reconnects people to meanings discovered in the task itself. The wheelwright does not invent the virtues of the wood. He responds to them. Newport extends this to cognitive work. A programmer, lawyer, writer, marketer, or consultant can treat skilled knowledge work as craft. The source of meaning is not a rare job description. It is a rare approach to the job. To cultivate skill with care and concentration is to turn ordinary professional activity into something with weight. That is why the chapter can close with the larger claim of Part 1. A deep life is not merely productive. A deep life is a good life. This conclusion prepares the transition into the rules. The practical program that follows is demanding, but it is demanding in service of a life that feels less scattered and more fully inhabited. Part 2, the rules. Rule 1. Work deeply. David Duane's eudaimonia machine turns the argument into a system. An imagined building designed to move a worker through galleries, libraries, offices, and finally chambers for uninterrupted thought. Newport uses the machine as a symbol. Since most people will not get architecture built around depth, they need routines that simulate its effect. The reason is willpower. Concentration is not summoned reliably by good intentions in the middle of a distracted afternoon. It must be protected by structure. That is why this rule is long and varied. Newport is not offering one productivity trick. He is building an operating system for repeatedly entering a difficult mental state. The first choice is a depth philosophy. The monastic approach, used by figures like Donald Knuth and Neil Stevenson, minimizes shallow obligations almost completely. The bimodal approach, modeled by Jung and Adam Grant, alternates open periods with clearly marked stretches of deep isolation. The rhythmic approach makes depth habitual, as Brian Chappell did by writing his dissertation early every weekday morning. The journalistic approach fits depth into whatever openings appear, but it works only for people already trained to switch into focus quickly. The point is not to copy a heroic schedule. The point is to choose a pattern that your real life can sustain. This is an important anti-heroic move. The monastic posture is attractive because it is simple and dramatic, but for many jobs it would be irresponsible or impossible. The best philosophy is the one that creates real depth without destroying the obligations that make your professional life function. Once the pattern exists, Newport asks for rituals. A deep work ritual specifies where you will work, how long you will work, what rules govern the session, and how your body will be supported. The ritual reduces the mental bargaining that normally drains willpower. Some projects also need grand gestures. Rowling checking into the Balmoral Hotel, Bill Gates taking Think Weeks, and Peter Shankman buying a flight to Tokyo all made a hard task feel important enough to unlock energy. These moves work because they changed the psychology of commitment. A hotel suite, a cabin, or a costly flight tells the mind that the task has crossed from optional intention into serious mission. Newport is not against collaboration. He rejects the open office because constant exposure destroys depth, but he also rejects the fantasy that insight always comes from solitary genius. Bell Labs and the old Building 20 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology worked because they combined hubs for encounter with spokes for private focus. Bratton and Bardine's transistor work shows a further nuance. Some problems benefit from collaborative deep work, the whiteboard effect, where another serious mind pushes you past your urge to drift. The rule then borrows execution discipline from business. Choose a wildly important goal for your deep work, track lead measures such as hours spent in depth, keep a visible scoreboard, and review the score every week. Newport's own tally of deep hours helped him publish 9 papers in a year. This matters because many people already agree that depth is valuable but still fail to execute it. Strategy is cheap. Execution needs measures, feedback, and regular recommitment. Finally, the rule defends laziness in the form of a shutdown ritual. By reviewing open loops, planning next steps, and ending the day with a clear phrase, you let the mind release work until tomorrow. Depth is intense enough that it needs idleness as its partner. Rule 2. Embrace boredom. At 6 in the morning, Adam Marlin's Talmud study at a Spring Valley synagogue shows that focus is not only something you do during scheduled deep work. It is something you train all day. Marlin and others repeatedly wrestle with demanding texts. That scene shows mental discipline as a practiced ability. The corollary is blunt. Deep work sessions will fail if the rest of your day teaches your brain to flee every hint of boredom. The rule therefore attacks a subtle mistake. Many people imagine focus as a switch they can flip for important work while spending every spare moment training the opposite reflex. Clifford Nass's research on multitasking gives the warning. People who constantly switch attention online do not simply become good at switching. They become worse at filtering relevance, worse at managing memory, and less ready for sustained thought. Newport therefore criticizes the Internet Sabbath as insufficient. One quiet day cannot repair a week of automatic checking. Instead of scheduling occasional breaks from distraction, schedule occasional breaks to use distraction. Set blocks for Internet use, and outside those blocks stay offline. When boredom arrives before the next block, the resistance itself becomes concentration training. Newport is careful not to make this a purity test. The Internet can be necessary and useful. The point is to prevent it from becoming the default escape route whenever attention starts to hurt. The next practice is to work like Theodore Roosevelt. At Harvard, Roosevelt packed his days with boxing, naturalism, social life, and study, yet earned strong grades because his study fragments were ferociously intense. Newport asks you to imitate this with occasional Roosevelt dashes. Choose a deep task, set a deadline just inside the edge of feasibility, and attack it without escape. These dashes build the experience of concentration at a higher intensity than ordinary work demands. The deadline must be realistic enough to beat and hard enough to require teeth-gritting focus. Used occasionally, it functions like interval training for the attention system. Productive meditation then turns walking, commuting, or showering into focus practice. Pick one well-defined professional problem and keep returning attention to it when the mind wanders or loops over easy material. Newport also recommends structured memory training. using Daniel Killif and card memorization to show that attention can be strengthened by hard, repeatable mental routines. The exact exercise matters less than the principle. A mind that never tolerates boredom cannot go deep on command. A mind trained to stay with difficulty can. In this rule, boredom is not emptiness to be eliminated. It is the weight room where concentration is built. Rule 3. Quit social media. Baratunde Thurston disconnected for 25 days after a life of extreme online connection. This is not a call to abandon the internet. It is a demand for a more adult standard of tool selection. His experiment brought relief, but the deeper lesson is that our public conversation offers only two crude options: total rejection or resigned hyperconnection. Newport wants the middle ground. Network tools should be treated as tools, not as moral obligations or identity badges. This distinction keeps the chapter from becoming technophobic. A tool can be useful in one life and wasteful in another. The issue is whether it earns the right to sit close to your attention. The enemy is the any-benefit mindset. If a tool offers any possible advantage, people assume it deserves access to their attention. Newport argues that this is absurd when compared with skilled trades. A farmer like Forrest Pritchard does not buy equipment because it has one minor upside. He asks whether it serves the core activities that make the farm succeed and whether the benefit outweighs the cost. Knowledge workers should use the same craftsman approach. Identify your most important professional and personal goals, name the few activities that truly support them, then keep only the tools that substantially help those activities. The law of the vital few explains the severity of the filter. A small number of activities produce most of the value. This is why a small benefit is not enough. A tool that slightly helps a low-value activity can still be a bad trade if it weakens the few activities that drive your real goals. Newport then turns the analysis into an experiment. Ryan Nicodemus held a packing party for his possessions, boxed almost everything, and kept only what he actually used. Do the same with social media. Stop using every service for 30 days without announcing it, then ask whether the month would have been notably better with the service and whether people cared that you were gone. Many tools survive because they create a fear of missing out and a false sense that others are waiting for your updates. The experiment replaces anxiety with evidence. If life was not worse and the audience did not notice, the tool's claim on your time becomes much harder to defend. The last target is entertainment browsing. Arnold Bennett argued that workers should treat leisure as a day within the day, not as dead time after real life ends. Newport updates that advice for a world of algorithmic clickbait. If evenings and weekends are left empty, entertainment sites will fill them with low-quality novelty. The answer is not grim asceticism. It is planned leisure, reading, exercise, hobbies, and in-person company that give the mind a richer alternative. Quitting social media in this rule means refusing to let engineered distraction become the default owner of your attention. The chapter's deeper target is passivity. You should choose your tools and your leisure by their contribution to a life of depth, not by the cleverness with which they solicit the next click. Rule 4. Drain the shallows. 37 Signals later base camp shortened summer weeks to 4 days and found that important work still got done. The company later gave employees a month free from shallow obligations so they could pursue deeper projects, and valuable ideas emerged. The lesson is not that every workplace can copy the experiment. It is that shallow work often feels urgent while contributing less than people assume. Shallow work cannot disappear, but it must be confined. The goal is therefore not a fantasy of pure depth. The goal is to stop shallow obligations from quietly crowding out the limited number of deep hours a mind can actually perform. The first tactic is to schedule every minute of the workday. Newport does not mean that a plan should become a prison. He means that every block of time should receive an intentional job, and the plan should be revised when reality changes. Without that habit, email, web browsing, and requests seep into every open space. With it, you keep asking what makes the most sense for the time that remains. The value lies in thoughtfulness, not rigidity. A good schedule can be redrawn many times in a day and still succeed if each revision protects the most important work from autopilot. The second tactic is to quantify the depth of activities. Ask how many months it would take to train a smart recent graduate with no specialized background to do the task. Editing a serious academic paper might require years of expertise. Preparing a routine slide deck or attending a status meeting might require far less. This thought experiment strips away the feeling of importance and reveals whether a task actually uses hard-won skill. Once the answer is visible, you can bias time toward tasks that both create value and stretchability. Newport then recommends a shallow work budget. Ask a boss or yourself what percentage of time should be shallow, often somewhere between 30 and 50% for established knowledge workers. The number gives you cover to refuse, restructure, or compress obligations that would otherwise look harmless one by one. Fixed schedule productivity adds a sharper constraint. Newport's own rule of ending work by 5:30 and Radhika Nagpal's 50-hour academic week show that firm limits force better choices. The most dangerous productivity word is yes. Limits make shallowness compete for admission instead of drifting in as the default. They also reveal whether a job really supports depth or only praises it in theory. The final battlefield is email. Sender filters make correspondence do more work before they reach you. Process-centric replies spend a few extra minutes up front to close the loop and prevent long message chains. The professorial approach says not every ambiguous or low-value message deserves a response. These tactics sound severe only because the current convention treats an inbox as a command system. Newport wants the opposite. Shallow work should serve deep work, not silently govern it. The rule is ruthless because the shallow rarely announces itself as a life strategy. It arrives as reasonable little requests until the day has no room left for work that changes anything. Conclusion. Newport closes by returning to the people who choose focus when distraction would be easier. Bill Gates and Paul Allen both mattered to Microsoft, but Walter Isaacson summarized one difference sharply. Gates was a serial obsessor. Newport then turns to his own career. Before becoming a professor, he trained himself for the coming scarcity of time by imposing tighter limits, refusing night work, taking long midday breaks, and keeping his research moving under constraints. Later, while writing this book and preparing for tenure, he recommitted to depth with unusual intensity. He worked through problems on subway rides, while walking the dog, while shoveling snow, and during any stretch where his mind could grapple with something consequential. This personal turn matters because the book is not written from the position of effortless genius. Newport presents depth as something he had to train, renew, and protect as his professional life became more crowded. The conclusion is not that everyone should copy that extreme year. Newport admits that it was exhausting. The lesson is that depth is powerful enough to transform output and meaning. The book has argued first that deep work is valuable, rare, and meaningful. Then that it can be trained through rituals, boredom tolerance, careful tool selection, and disciplined limits on the shallow. The final invitation is stark. The comforts of distraction are easy, and the fears behind depth are real. Isolation, difficulty, and the possibility of discovering the limits of your own ability. But if you are willing to push your mind fully toward things that matter, you join the focused few. In Newport's closing vision, a life built around depth becomes richer in productivity and richer in meaning. The conclusion leaves the reader with a choice between two professional identities, one shaped by convenient distraction and one shaped by the difficult satisfaction of doing the best work the mind can do.